Good morning, everyone. I think we'll get started now. I'd like to welcome all of you to this 19th year of the Kruse Economic Forum. It's hard to believe we started this series back in 2001. I'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Rob Le Chevalier, and I'm a shareholder at Buckley Law in Lake Oswego. And before we get going with our speakers, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Our sponsors are Buckley Law, UBS Financial Services, Columbia Bank, Pragma Group, Shorenstein Realty Services, Pamphlet Media and the Lake Oswego Review, JLL, Hoffman Stewart and Schmidt, and the Lake Oswego Chamber of Commerce. And without our sponsors, we could not have this program, and they've been very faithful over the years. So again, thank you to our sponsors that are making this all possible. Today, we're presenting the future of work and featuring guest speakers, Susan Garriety from Point B and Tia Over from the Mathews Group. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in your Zoom control panel. We will monitor that box and have time for questions at the end of the presentations. We are also recording the program and will share the presentation and speaker slides in a follow-up email. Workplaces are changing. Who can believe it's been over 6 months since COVID started, and we're all working remotely. As the work from home experiment stretches on, some cracks are starting to emerge. Projects take longer, collaboration seems harder, and training new workers is a struggle. So what is the future going to look like post-COVID? We've asked two experts today to come and share their experiences with us. Our first presenter today is Susan Garriety. Susan is a senior managing consultant at Point B, a global management consulting firm founded in 1995. Based in Portland, Susan is a leader for the future of work practice. Whoever thought to be a practice group for the future of work, but there is. Using a holistic approach to assist companies with organizational transformation into an evolving and flexible environment. Susan brings a future of work perspective to her work as a consultant and as a speaker. Her extensive background in helping companies transform their workforce experience through holistic approaches has brought recognition for her success in helping clients create a pragmatic, human-centered solutions. Susan, we're going to turn it over to you now, and I'd love to be able to welcome you with an applause.
Thank you, Rob. I sure appreciate it. Tia and I know are very excited to be here, so thank you all for having us here, and really looking forward to talking through some I think interesting concepts. So as we think about, as I stay here reimagining the workplace, one of the first things I wanted to do is share a little bit more about me. This is my family life, so in addition to the professional bio that Rob shared, I am a fourth generation Oregonian, so I'm very proud to call Oregon home, and I live in Tigard with my husband and our two, as I affectionately refer to them, fur children. You might be a little bit amazed by our 2-year-old, who's a 170-pound English Mastiff, so it's like having another very large toddler in the house. So when I get interrupted on these kinds of calls, it's usually by him coming up and nudging me, because he can reach all the way up to my arm. So if that happens during this, I'll be sure to indicate that. But I've been at Point B for 6 years. As Rob mentioned, I come out of financial services and specifically insurance. And I'm also a proud pilot, so I went to University of Portland, and very excited again to call Portland home. This is just a little bit about our company. So if you're interested in learning more about Point B, again, we've been around, this is our 25th anniversary. What a year to call 25. And we have just under 1,000 folks across 13 locations in the States. And we're also a member of a international consortium called Next Continent. So we actually also serve internationally as well. So let's talk a bit about the future of work, and tell me if some of these statements, I won't go through all of these statements, but I'm curious how many of these may resonate for you. And I have a few that I think are particularly notable as we kind of go around the horn here. So these are really what we see as some of the disruptions that are currently taking place across all of our workforce. And I'm going to start with the statement of 65% of remote workers are experiencing some kind of burnout. Curious if that is something that you all are dealing with. There's also a whole question around real estate, and is your office size, the composition and location of where you do work, does that need to change? Has that changed post-COVID? And how do you, through all of this, continue to communicate culture? That is one of the #1 concerns and issues that we hear about on a daily basis from our clients. How do you keep that culture alive and relevant through this large transformation that we're all experiencing? And furthermore, how do you also flex to your customers' expectations? Those are changing, those are different based on what the world is bringing us today, but they're also arguably maybe related to how it used to be. And so do those need to shift? How do you kind of accommodate those? And how do you also, particularly with your employee force, really think about and enable real-time information? It's more critical now than ever. And so how are you thinking about that? How do you go about that? And last but not least, and this is really just a great segue, I think, to the rest of the information that Tia and I are going to share. How do organizations really put together a complete vision for the post-COVID future? So how do you think about it differently? How do you see it as an opportunity versus just a pure obstacle? And so I'd love to be able to talk through a few ideas with you. One of those ideas that we'll see on this next slide has to do with really thinking through a specific frameworks. The way that we think about the future of work and specifically flex work is thinking about it multidimensionally. So one of the things that we have found with the majority of our clients, regardless of the workplace, regardless of the type of work that's done, is that often they're thinking about things in maybe a single dimension or perhaps just a couple of dimensions. And one of the transformational mindsets that we really try to impress upon clients is to approach their work and how they think about that workforce experience in multi-dimensions. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean by that. So from a human perspective, this is all about who obviously needs to do the work. It's all of us. It's all of your greatest assets that you have, your people. The physical dimension, that's obviously where the work gets done. It's the environment. And it's a little bit provocative actually to even call it physical these days, because arguably it could be from anywhere, right? It's not necessarily brick and mortar as we think of it. It's the digital dimension. So it's the tools that we leverage in order to do our work. And ultimately, it's also the machine dimension, another provocative word, intentionally provocative, knowing that there's a lot of automation. There's a lot of ways to think about process differently and to think about how you improve upon your processes by getting rid of non-value add work and potentially automating it. So it's things like AI, robotics, other forms of automation. And so really the way that we think about approaching the challenge that is COVID, the challenge that is the future of work, is to think about it in these 4 dimensions. And so what we encourage our clients to do, and all of you to think about and to consider, is really thinking about tackling any of those common issues that you may find in this multidimensional way. And so it's really thinking about them simultaneously, not necessarily compartmentalized, because in doing so, by thinking about it dimensionally, you're going to not only really increase and enhance the experience for your employees, but ultimately you're going to have a much more robust ROI relative to that sustainable transformation. So that's the first kind of tip or trick that I would offer you. And then next, again, let's talk about some of those very real issues that we think about or need to consider as we think about workforce experience, and specifically in flex work. And these are those issues, again, that have been kind of dimensionalized. So it's things like, you know, is your remote work strategy fully defined? All of us have had to adapt very quickly. As Rob mentioned, I think we're entering into like month 7 of kind of COVID transformation. And so where are you? Where are you in that process? Where are you in that strategy? Is leadership effective in terms of how they're managing a remote workforce? We'll talk a little bit about how that has shifted and needs to shift and continue to shift going forward. It's everything like, what recognition processes do you have in place? How have those shifted? That ties into culture. It ties into how you're going to maintain your engagement going forward. And then ultimately, you know, what is that organizational alignment? So those are examples just even from a human dimension. From a physical dimension, it's, you know, again, rethinking how and where you do your business. How do you interact with your customers? What are those expectations? What's that strategy going forward? Is there an opportunity to rethink your real estate footprint? And how are you utilizing the space that you do have? Have you thought of ways to do that, to even provide even a more safe environment for your employees, and really fit to purpose environments? So that's the concept where there still is a need for folks to meet in person. As an example, how do you do that, and how do you do that safely? And is there a shift in the way that you're even utilizing your space today? And then certainly from an ergonomics, environmental perspective, I think there's a lot of safety concerns out there into how do you think about wellness for the entire organization? And then how do you deal with things like travel, which I know Tia can speak a bit to. From a digital perspective, it's all about the tools, right? We're only as good as the tools that we have to collaborate. We're only as good as the tools we have to provide access to information. So what's available, what tools have you provided for your employees? And do we have the right security in place in order to you know, provide the flexibility to work from home or work from a Starbucks or wherever folks may want to work from, but doing so in a way that, you know, the information, particularly if it's proprietary or it's confidential, is safe. And so how do we do that? And, you know, how do we provide support? You know, the way that we have thought about those support models in the past, you know, if I have a problem with my laptop, you know, I'm used to, you know, maybe calling a number, but maybe walking down the hall and just asking for help. And so how do I do that if I'm in a remote environment? And what are we doing to provide, again, that best support? And then from a process perspective, again, we call it machine. Are we really digging into that value add work versus the non-value add work? And do we know what that is? Now more than ever, it's critical that our folks are spending time on the things that are the most meaningful versus those things that are arguably throwaway work. So how do we help with that? And how do we, with all of this, again, seeing COVID actually as an opportunity to expand and to grow, how do we help our folks continue into a culture of innovation and creativity and see this again as an opportunity versus an obstacle? And ultimately, how do we measure ourselves? And how do we continue to improve, continue to inspire ourselves along the way? And those are some tricky issues for us to be considering. So let's talk a little bit about some ideas of how we could go about kind of thinking in a new way. And again, I think this is just a great opportunity to ask all of you and to have you consider what are ways that we can do do our best in this situation that we find ourselves in. For example, when we talk about employee support, we know disruption is all over the place, that we're dealing with, school-age kids at home. We are dealing with all sorts of social unrest and other issues going on. And so how can we best help our employees continue to focus, continue to have the best work experience that they can, but at the same time recognizing that there are other arguably more critical things going on in the world that we also need to allow time for and allow space for. So it is, making sure that there are frequent feedback channels. That's one opportunity. It's monitoring and evaluating the technology in the sense of what's available that's coming to market that may be of value for your employee force. And how do we quickly shift and work into new solutions in a way that are going to benefit our workplace. And can we do all of that in a way too that we can govern effectively and make sure that there still is accountability? The second topic here of dimensional leadership. So when we talk about this, again, I think it's talking about those 4 dimensions and really thinking about how we shift the way we think in leadership terms. One of the common concerns that I hear is, well, how do I know if I'm someone that's managing others, how do I know that they're really working if I can't see them, if I can't actually be with them? And so it's really walking away and getting away from that quote unquote kind of butts and seats mentality and being much more accommodating in terms of ways to still connect with your employees, to still know that they're being productive, but to find other methods for doing so. And so it's leveraging that digital technology. It's redesigning processes so there's a better understanding of what's going on and where. And it's making sure that there is that strong person-to-person engagement. And at the same time, think about that as a great opportunity because we also for the first time have 5 generations working in the workplace. And this is a great opportunity to recruit and to really provide a very flexible environment where folks aren't feeling micromanaged. They are feeling like they've got a lot of freedom, they've got a lot of autonomy. But that also comes with accountability. So how can we provide both in the work experience that folks have? And ultimately, how are we helping employees really adapt to their environments? That's a really critical piece as well. Third, but not last, is our embracing long-term flex work. So again, as we think about this in the long term, not just as a response to COVID, but truly as a future way of working, how do we ensure that we are adjusting appropriately? And it is things like ensuring that we are meeting people where they're at, and that's literal and figurative from the standpoint of where do people want to work from? Are they working from home? Are they working from, again, the local coffee shop, or are they wanting to work from a vacation home, or, anywhere? The idea is to really be able to provide that level of flexibility where we can. And at the same time, be considerate of your working parents and the specific demands that those folks may have. Just like you may have employees that have elder care issues and concerns. So all of those same things that have existed before exist now. Arguably, in some cases, they're even more magnified because of the demands that folks are under in their daily lives. So again, how can we help them establish a more effective work-life balance and ultimately help them further focus on wellness? So these are all some of those topics for consideration. A great opportunity, I think, to consider what we can do differently. And at the same time, I know you'll love to hear from Tia some very specific examples of what that looks like and how that starts to manifest. So with that, let me just share a few resources. Again, you'll get a copy of this deck as part of the follow-up to our webinar today, but these are some additional assets that we bring to the table that may be of interest, some different articles around everything from, again, pondering that permanent move to remote work, to how do you empower leaders, how do you provide even more empathy within the workplace, and even some guiding principles as you think more about flex work and remote work. So thank you. I appreciate your time. Look forward to your questions. I do have my contact information as well in here. And with that, I will turn it over to Tia.
Thanks, Susan. Our second presenter today is Tia Over. Tia is a partner in the Mathews Group, which is a communications and PR agency. It was founded on a flex work friendly model. The Mathews Group has been 100% remote workforce for 10 years. Tia leads the firm's business development and efforts to ensure the team collaborates seamlessly around the globe. Tia has over 15 years of experience advising Fortune 500 and Fortune 50 clients, small businesses, nonprofits, governmental agency, and corporate communication strategy. Her expertise lies in strategic communications planning, internal communications, and copywriting. Tia is a member of the PRSA, Counselors Academy, and Society of Women Engineers. So I'd like to know how you work around the globe, and hopefully you'll tell us that today. Thank you, Tia.
Well, thank you, Rob, and thanks for the great setup, Susan. It's just wonderful to be with you all today. And my goal for the time today that we have together, 15 to 20 minutes, is to share the Mathews Group business model and give you a bit of a back to the future example of how we've been doing it for 10 years, in the hopes that if you have just been plunged into remote work as a result of COVID, you might find some shining light at the end of the tunnel for how you can make it sustainable and work for you post-COVID. So I'll talk about our business model and share some secrets to success we've enjoyed growing in revenue, client roster, and our team membership over the past 10 years, as well as some practical tips for how you can make it work for you, again, as I mentioned, now and into the future, and I'll leave you with some resources as well. So for starters, I wanted to introduce myself a little bit more. Rob gave a very kind introduction, so I won't go too much into my current role, but here I am with my husband, Andrew, and our two kids, Lily and Dylan. We live in Portland. I'm a native Oregonian, grew up in Albany, went to Linfield, and started out my career working in communications roles from the get-go. I studied mass communications and political science at Linfield, and have been working in those worlds ever since. I was at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., working in public affairs in 2004, which is where I actually met Melissa Mathews, our founder and president. And then I went on to work for We Communications, which was then known as Wagner Edstrom, located on 3 Center Point, so right off Kruse Way there in Lake Oswego, on the Microsoft Enterprise IT account. And then as we were growing our family, Andrew and I decided it would be great if one of us could find a flex work option, and that was me, because I had already returned to Wagner in a job share capacity after Lily was born. And it was great, but I was still traveling quite a bit on the Microsoft account. And when we got pregnant with Dylan, we said, okay, something's got to give here. Andrew was content to work long hours and travel as well. And so we made the choice that I'd pursue something in the flex remote realm. And I had heard that Melissa, my former NASA colleague, had just launched this fully remote agency. And I thought, that's kind of cool. Why don't I try that? I reached out and joined, and the rest is history. So that's a bit about me. And then I'll talk now about our company, which I'm so very proud of. As Rob mentioned, we're a strategic communications and public relations agency. We focus primarily on corporate communications and some of those aspects he mentioned underneath that: internal comms, executive comms. Because our origin story with Melissa and I having met at NASA, my time at Microsoft, she had done some contract work for some other big engineering companies. We have found our happy place to be helping technical professionals, engineers, scientists be better communicators, as well as those folks working in research and development and higher ed. So as far as small of a team we have a pretty mighty client roster that we're proud of. And I'll point out too that being a distributed team and fully remote has really come to help us with our clients as well, because they've been many of them either plunged into remote for the first time this year, although truth be told, many of them had been doing distributed in some form or fashion leading up to 2020. But it's really given us a perspective and a set of expertise that we bring to bear to them in terms of counseling them on how to do the best practices and communications with remote teams. I will do a quick plug too for a newsletter that Melissa and I published called the Engineering 100. It's a monthly newsletter, and you can check it out on my contact information at the end of the deck, but would love to have you subscribe and follow along with some of the stories we're telling in that space. All right, so before I go into sort of the Mathews Group origin story in the sense of why we decided to go remote from day one, I wanted to share our current business model with you to help ground you in the way we operate. So Melissa and I are the partners in the company. She leads up all of the account work. I do operations and business development, and I do oversee the University of Washington Continuum College account. We have 2 full-time employees, a vice president and director of client accounts. And then we're actually a hybrid model in the sense that we have a balance of employees and subcontractors. Our subcontractors bring specific skill sets to bear, listed here. And when you combine everyone on our team, we span primarily 6 locations: Portland, DC, Atlanta, Kansas City, and 2 international posts. So that brings up a whole host of issues with regard to time zone and keeping projects going throughout the course of a day, as well as finding the right sweet spot times to collaborate internally. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a slide down the road. And then, prior to COVID, our folks would work sometimes in shared office spaces. Susan mentioned coffee shop work or vacation home work. All of those things have happened for members of our team over the course of the last 10 years, but everyone is currently working from home. And then I wanted to call out the travel component because although we are a fully remote team, at any given point in time, someone on our team was traveling before this year. We would go to client meetings, conferences, offsites, trainings. In fact, I think it was 5 days before I was meant to board a flight to Memphis, Tennessee. In March, we had to cancel our 10-year anniversary team offsite. I know Susan and I compared commiserating notes around not being able to fully celebrate some of those milestones this year. So, even though we are work from home, folks are constantly on the go in normal times, and it really hasn't been an impediment to our ability to meet clients where they are and show up. So looking forward to the time when we can return to that form of normal. So the why we launched a virtual agency. I talked about how we're structured. I wanted to spend a little bit of time to give you sort of my pitch for if someone were to say, well, why would I want to start a remote agency? And sort of setting aside COVID for the time being and just thinking about what are the benefits and how have we enjoyed success in doing so. And the first point I'll make is that remote work equals freedom and flexibility. Productivity is no longer defined as a time on the clock or a physical location. It's about being able to deliver the work on deadline for sure, and in a way that isn't causing chaos and stress for your team or for your clients. But it just doesn't mean what it used to when people think about productivity in a business sense. So, the reason why Melissa was compelled to start this remote agency was her husband joined the Foreign Service, and she was immediately, as she describes it, going to become the traveling spouse of a diplomat. And so she either was going to choose to build a portable career or not really have one at all. And she chose to build the portable career. You know, I mentioned the driver for our family was to get more flexibility with children and balance with my husband's career as well. So that's I think the first thing to consider on the why side of the pros and cons chart is that it gives everyone, both the employer and the employees, that freedom to work from anywhere, and technology has really been the enabler for that. The second is that it levels the playing field, and by that I mean that no longer do agencies like ours have to think about the fact that, well, we're small, we're 10 to 12 people. How are we really going to be able to compete on big accounts and land major clients that would afford us lucrative enough contracts to kind of make this work? Well, we can do that because we're able to hire talent no matter where they live, and no matter what time zone they're in. And in doing that, we're bringing really senior skills and expertise forward that clients want to retain. And so it levels the playing field in the sense that you can work from anywhere at any time, build the team that you need based on the skill sets you're looking for and what your clients desire. And I'll getting back to that point around time zones, because we're located in Pacific, Central, Eastern, and Eastern European summer time zone is, I think, where the international zone is. We're able to hand projects across time zones throughout the course of the day. Clients don't have to worry about that. That's our job. So it really does level the playing field in that sense. By extension, it drives retention because you aren't having people leave a job due to life's disruptions, or be they happy ones or unforeseen, unfortunate ones. I would put COVID in the latter category. But expanding a family, as Susan mentioned, caring for an aging parent, having a spouse or a partner find a job that does require a place to work and up and moving your whole family, that doesn't mean that you have to quit your job. So I think we all know, especially those of us that lead organizations and companies, that every time someone walks out the door, that's a whole chunk of money that they're taking with them, in the sense that we have to then recruit and train up a new hire. And so if we're able to keep our best people, it's a win-win for everyone. And then by extension, remote work saves everyone money. If you don't have physical office space, you're saving on mortgage, rent, utilities, maintenance. And even if you have a hybrid model where maybe it's, and this is what I think a lot of folks are considering doing post-COVID, is bringing some folks back to the office, but not everyone. Well, guess what? You have a smaller office space and less overhead expense that you're on the ledger. It also saves the employees money. I'm sure you've discovered these past many months, you're not spending money on gas, dry cleaning bills, you're dining out less. So that's a win-win for everyone. And then it's also earth and resource friendly. Smaller carbon footprint as a result of less travel, both via car and plane. You are taking up, you're using less utilities and resources in that capacity. And it's also, I would put in the resource bucket, time. You're saving people time on commutes. Maybe it's only a half an hour, but it can be for many people up to 3 hours a day or more that you're spending in a car or on a metro. So it's really a classic case. I think remote work is a classic case of less is more in that sense. Okay, so I want to spend a little bit of time now sharing with you some tips for how to make remote teams run efficiently and effectively, so that some of those Achilles heels that I called out around distributed time zones, and even Susan brought up the very important aspect of technology that get addressed. So the first sort of sales pitch I will give, not a sponsor, but can't say enough good things about Microsoft Office 365 and Teams. Our group really just lives there. It's like the lifeblood of our organization. We not only do all of our client collaboration and work in there, but we also, it's the place where we have our own sort of team building and culture building online environment. We, all of us every morning chime in with something called a morning note. And we say not only kind of what our day looks like in terms of calls or meetings for work or some big projects we're working on, but we'll also call out, hey, I've got to run to a dentist appointment at this time, or my kid has a test I'm going to have to help them with for distance learning, so I'm going to be largely unavailable between noon and 12:30 or whatever. And that level of over communication is critical for a remote team. And it was before COVID, it certainly is now, and it will be in the future. I can't say enough about over communication as it relates to the internal team culture that you need to build. You know, the other great aspect about Microsoft Teams, if you haven't tapped into that resource, is that it also gives you video calls, voice calls. We use SharePoint as like our virtual file cabinet, and then certainly the Office suite and email. So again, it's just, it's where the work gets done for us. And then I wanted to suggest to you that as you think about building out your partners to help you get the job done, it's really important that you look for folks who understand the remote model. It doesn't mean that they themselves all have to be remote companies, but Melissa and I learned really quickly early on that while we are communications professionals and are very good at our job, we aren't necessarily the best thinking about all aspects of business. And so we started to say, well, who do we need to bring on to help us do that so that we can be in the business and not on the business as much. And so we hired a virtual staffing company to assign us a virtual assistant, and he's fantastic. He's actually located in New York, but he takes care of our calendar, does some inbox management. He does all of our accounts receivable and accounts payable, helps us think through things like planning our retreat. He did the bulk of the work for that earlier this year, client gifts, all of that sort of office management is just, it's a fantastic resource. And I will say, I don't know how we sort of got along before he came along, but if I could get in a time machine and fly back and talk to myself 3, 4, 5 years ago, I would have said, do this now, it makes sense. But it took us a while to get there because we both thought, can this virtual assistant thing really work? And trust me, it does, it's fantastic. We also have an HR consultancy on retainer, and they are also very well versed in distributed teams and have been a fantastic resource for us in terms of keeping us on track with all of the various states that we are registered in with employees, as well as just our own company's registration and headquarters. They are a great resource for things like helping with setting goals and metrics for employees as well as sub teams, and then reviews processes, employee manuals, and the like. It's also just a peace of mind thing for us that we know if something comes up, we have them on call if an employee needs help with something, or they've been immensely helpful this year with regard to COVID and providing information about PPP loans and just all kinds of things that we would have never imagined. So another plug there. And then I should have put on here, and Susan, I'm so glad you brought up on the aspect, the dimension of technology and even just the processes portion of machines for flex work. But we do have an IT support on retainer as well. And anytime anyone has any issue, they can text him or send him an email, and he's very responsive, remotes right in, takes care of our problems, and is just, again, a peace of mind for us. And then our attorney and our coaches as well, we made sure to find folks that again understood what it meant to support clients that are distributed around the globe and who have clients in similar situations as well, since they too are distributed for us. So that's really, if I can leave you with anything today, it's to consider if you are going to retain a remote agency or company model, the kind of folks that you have around you and the advice you're getting. And then I think this is my last slide before I go to resources. I did just want to take a second and return to this topic of remote work in real life versus in COVID life. And as someone who did it for 9 years before this type of current remote work we're in, I do just want to say, take heart. It actually does work very well when crazy conditions are not at play. And I will argue, even with the chaos of this year, it's the model, while being stress tested, is proving that it works too. So again, I'll just reiterate the importance of over communication. You know, in addition to those morning notes I mentioned that Melissa and I have the team do each day, we stood up at just weeks into sort of the global pandemic kind of breaking out and lockdown coming into play. We stood up weekly, we called them COVID coffees. We have since rebranded them to just coffee chats, but it was every Thursday morning. We would be on Teams video, she and I, and the whole team was welcome to join. It wasn't mandatory. We didn't have an agenda, but it was a chance for everyone to come together. Maybe everyone just sort of dropped their head in their hands and sighed and said some encouraging words and had a bit of event session, but oftentimes it turned into a great place for people to bring real-time client issues, because of course, while we were dealing with the crises leading the company, our clients were all dealing with it too. And so we had a lot of need for like getting all the brains in one place and problem solving together. So we heard from our team how much they appreciated us making that time available to them. And then by extension, the second bullet here, it just being accessible. I think it's really important that leaders during this time, and this is me giving you some advice as a comms person, not just a remote leader, but that you be very accessible to your people and that you're transparent about what you know and what you're going to do with the information available to you. And I think the other thing that this year has shown us is that we can't claim we know everything and things are constantly changing, but just to even acknowledge that as a leader and show confidence that you're going to be there through it all, and that we'll find the best outcome we can for each individual employee and for the company itself, I think is really important and has given, I know, our team a lot of confidence that we're here and we're going to see them through this. And then consider mindfulness and well-being benefits. This is something where we, about a month or two into COVID, we had a mindfulness coach come and present lead a session on one of our all hands. And it was so well received that we ended up making her services available to our employees in an ongoing fashion. I was just reading a Business Insider article the other day about how a lot of companies are thinking about mental health benefits for their people. Sometimes it's discounts on mental health apps on their smart device. Smart devices, or perhaps discounts on remote yoga classes, things like that. So I would encourage you to consider that for your team if you haven't already. And then the lead by example in taking leave. This, to me, addresses one of the biggest pain points in remote work all up, which is that it's very hard to define when the workday begins and when the workday ends when you're doing all of it from home. So Melissa and I have been very intentional this year, especially in these challenging times, about saying to our team, take your leave. And that doesn't mean tacking on just a Friday, a 3-day weekend. That means, in fact, our HR consultants recommend that depending on your policy, whether it's unlimited PTO or if you have a fixed PTO policy, that you require at least once a year that people take 5 consecutive days off, so that there's a 9-day stretch where they are completely unplugged. They're not working lightly. They're not checking, doing a call here and there. Nope, they are off. Because I always say, crispy brains don't bring their best work to clients and to your customers. And so you really do want your people, for the sake of their own personal health, but also for the benefit of your company in terms of the kind of work they're able to bring to bear in this remote environment, to really unplug now and again, and leave the work for another day. So those are my final tips for you here. I have, like Susan, I have a list of resources that you can click through at your leisure. I will make a plug for Portland's own Mac Pritchard. He has a great podcast, and he interviewed Melissa a few years back. If you want to listen to that and learn a little bit more about the origin story of the Mathews Group, that's a great listen. So thank you so very much for your time. Thank you to Rob and Amber for asking me to be here. I know we're going to kick it back for some of your questions. Rob, take it away.
Thank you, Tia. So we're now ready to start our question and answer portion. So just a reminder to type in your questions in the chat box in your control panel, and Amber will monitor those and then present them to our speakers. I'm going to kick off with a couple of questions. So here's one. Well, we're all hoping maybe that in the second or third quarter of 2021, some of us can get back into the office. What do you think is going to change post-COVID? And what should we be thinking about with the, you talked about a hybrid model, the traditional office environment. How is all that going to work when some of us are in the office and some of us are still working remotely? And whoever wants to answer, Susan, maybe?
Yeah, Rob, I think what's interesting about that particular question that'll kind of turn back around is I think the more that we can look forward and not consider that there is a getting back to normal, but more so, and I know this has been overused, but truly, what is that new normal, right? What is the new path that we take? And as Tia kind of outlined, I think there's a lot of opportunity. Again, I think it's the difference between seeing this as a problem and kind of burying your head and being frustrated until things return to the way they were. We advise clients to do exactly the opposite, which is to truly see this as an opportunity and think about ways that you can actually lean into it and see it as a way to transform your business and truly think about how you can do your business differently. So and again, it covers all those topics we've talked about. It's everything from your real estate footprint to the way that you interact with customers, to the way clearly that you support and flex with your employees and the needs that they have. I can see this really being a fantastic recruiting tool going forward if folks lean in. And the same way that Tia described for her agency and firm, that flexibility really gives them, I mean, if you think about it, talk about making the world flat, you truly can recruit and engage and be with people all across the globe, and that includes your employees. So there's really no limit to who you can have as a part of your workforce. So to me, it's a real opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, I was just looking through my notes here to find, there was a survey that Harvard, Gallup, and Stanford had done, and this was pre-COVID, about remote work and using it as both a recruiting and retention tool. And in their poll, 53% of the people said that they would opt to take a job that offered a remote benefit. And that I think it was like 14% said that they would actually change jobs if the current job they had wouldn't offer it, but they could find one that would guarantee it as a benefit. So, that speaks to life pre-COVID. I imagine it would forecast something, a bellwether for the future. But I think the biggest takeaway in terms of any type of return to normal, or as Susan said, maybe reimagining the future of work in the sense of what does remote mean to you now in a way that it didn't before, is that folks will just be more, they'll understand that it's doable. And again, I heard the GitHub chief operations officer, which is a company that was acquired by Microsoft years ago. They do open source work, but they've been fully remote since day one. And she even admits, she said, remote work's not a panacea. It doesn't fix everything. It's not for everyone. There are certainly some industries it doesn't work for, but for those of us in the service industry, it makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. Even if it's just in bits and pieces. So my hope is that people will have gone through this grand experiment, albeit painful, and come out the other side saying, yeah, this can work.
I have one more, and then we'll go to our audience here, our participants. What about new employees? You talk about recruiting and retention, and if you already have a team together, we kind of moved digitally, we moved remotely. We still already had a connection before we started working remotely. How do you bring in and engage new employees in a remote environment like this?
Well, I'll take that one initially, Rob. I'll just say, in full disclosure, we have not had to do that since COVID. We've had some folks calibrate their hours and things like that, but we haven't actually had to onboard someone. So the first call I would make would be to our HR consultancy and say, okay, help, how do we make this happen? And I know that they have had to manage that for clients through this year, certainly. So I would really rely on our partners.
Yeah, I would just second that. I happen to be working with a client team right now where they've just hired on 4 to 5 new VPs that are in a direct line to their CDIO, and they've had to do all of that remotely. That includes the recruitment, that includes the onboarding, that includes the inclusion in the day-to-day. And one of the very effective ways that they've done that is to provide actually a very specific set of partners. So they have not only their aligned HRBP from that business partner perspective, but they also have a buddy of somebody who's well established in that organization, a peer, to help them with really even the cultural assimilation and understanding of how to do kind of some of the day-to-day operation components. And so there's a lot of support that has specifically been lined out. One would argue, again, this is an example where it's an opportunity. One would argue that that's exactly the type of structure that should be set up regardless. But COVID has really, I think, forced the hand of folks to even be that much more planful, that much more thoughtful about how, and that much more intentional about how they think about recruiting and bringing folks on.
Great. Amber, do you want to go ahead and
Sure. We have a question. How have you been able to develop potential leaders remotely?
Yeah, again, I mean, example that I just shared, very large athletic and shoe manufacturer that we all may be familiar with is the client that I'm working with at the moment. And they are going through a very large transformation, not just because of COVID, but just for normal business reasons. And a lot of that is forcing them to rethink the way that they not only again recruit leaders, but think about how those leaders, and that's what we see consistently across our client base. So when you are having to develop those leaders, I think, again, it's just being that much more intentional about that development plan. What are some of the, not just the support network that you're putting into place, but being that much more intentional about what it is that they need. And that's a two-way street. That's having them also take responsibility for making those asks, but also being at the ready to provide it. So I don't see it having changed directly in terms of the support model. Where I do think it's changed is even thinking differently about how we lead, right? So as a leader, it's also making that shift from kind of traditional management processes and really learning to trust through a remote environment, which can be difficult because you're not used to not being able to go down the hall and just chat with someone and essentially be secure in the work that they're doing. So I think it's a matter, as Tia mentioned, I think it is things informally. Here's what I have planned for the day. It's daily stand-ups. It's some sort of a opportunity each morning to connect and ensure that the team is strong and understands what's planned for the day, and then just continuing to kind of engage as you go. But then think about all of the flexibility that provides as well, which can really be exciting, I think, for a lot of our leaders.
This question was directed towards Tia at first, but it's any tips for managing parenting, homeschool duties, and job duties?
Oh, golly. Well, it's called call in reinforcements. I mean, Andrew and I have been working he started working from home, I think the very beginning of March, maybe the end of February. So, that was a huge disruption for me, I will say, because I had gotten so accustomed to everyone being gone for a large chunk of the day, and this really becoming my office, and having to juggle not only office space and who's taking a call from where, and do you need to be able to close the door for your video call or what, but having to a 6th grader and a 3rd grader doing 100% distance learning, it has been quite a chore. So I will say that the way Melissa and I have been intentional about supporting our team, who are also, many of them have kids at home, some have kids in college now, but juggling that is just to say, okay, tell me what your week's going to look like in terms of when are your carved out working hours. And if we need to massage those a bit because we know we're going to need to bring support in on one end or the other, then we have to do that. So we really rely on the team calendar and Outlook to define, I'm working from here to here, but maybe not here to here. You can text me at this time, you can call me at this time. So getting back to that over communication and need to be very, very, very like hyper transparent about what your day looks like so that the work can still get done. And getting back to Amber, I think part of the question was just like tips for making it work. We've been so fortunate, our parents are retired, and so we have been having them come in to help during the day, which is a huge luxury, and I'm extraordinarily grateful for it. But otherwise, I will add one more thing to that, which is that I think employers need to be okay with the fact that the work's going to get done at weird hours. You might have a working parent as your employee who can't get on to do something till 10:30 at night. And as long as they're not going to miss a deadline or let a ball drop, don't be okay with the fact that the deliverable might land in your inbox at midnight and you'll see it the next morning when you get up. I think we have to be okay with some of that in order to preserve people's health and let them like lead their families and their lives in this weird time.
So I know we're at 9 o'clock, but we do have a couple more questions. Do we want to keep going? Okay. Isn't there value in having the connections that only come from face-to-face, particularly with clients?
Yeah, I definitely think there is that value. So what I would encourage, we talked a bit about this, but I think it is really thinking about our future in a hybrid way, right? So we've talked a lot about remote and flex work, but part of that consideration is also when are those key moments when you do need to be face-to-face, when you do need that key workshop, as an example, in order to really work through whatever, the issue is at the moment. So I don't want to give the impression that folks should be considering doing 100% remote unless that really lends itself, like Tia's agency and that work, right? There is certain work. One of the stories I shared with Rob and Amber and Tia earlier was my husband and I happened to have a need to meet with our personal attorney just a few weeks ago, and all of us agreed that actually it made sense to meet in person. That initial meeting, we did it safely. We did it with masks in a conference room, socially distanced. But we had that initial conversation because that is one of those key moments I think everybody who works for a law firm can appreciate, where you need that face-to-face and that trust building that can only come from that. But then everything we've done subsequent to that has been remote. So that's just a great example, I think, of where there is a good hybrid model out there. I think you just want to be, again, intentional, thoughtful, planful around those moments.
I think this is our last question. What are tips for drawing boundaries for work time and space when working from home?
So for me, it's about setting expectations with my team and even my own family. So we, by extension, I talked about putting things on the calendar. The kids have a schedule when they wake up in the morning for all the things they're supposed to do before they sit down and start their school day. And I try to make sure I have a similar mindset about the way I approach my work so that I know I'm getting up, I'm giving myself some, before I look at my email, which I will admit is harder to do than it is to say, of course. But don't look at email. Give yourself a chance to have some quiet time in the morning, and then dive into the work, and then know, okay, at this time, at this appointed time, I am going to log off to either go on a run or a walk or do whatever I'm going to do. And then I'm going to come back to the work, and then I'm going to log off at this time. And again, not look at it until whatever time of day. Again, that is a work in progress for me, as well as the rest of our team, especially those of us who work in PR. I mean, we're kind of meant to be on call at all times. That's sort of the nature of the beast of this work. So that's a very, very challenging thing to do. But I do encourage anyone who works from home to try to aspire at least to those lines. Because otherwise it's just like, a vortex of constant work, and that's not good for anyone.
Okay, I think that's all of our questions.
I want to thank, and again, we want to do a virtual thank you to our speakers, Tia and Susan and Amber, for organizing all of this virtual program. And we actually did a rehearsal, so thank you for putting all the technology together. And again, want to thank all of our sponsors that help make this possible. And we are looking forward to another Kruseway Economic Forum next spring, whether it'll be in person or virtual or hybrid. It still remains to be seen, but I suspect that once we go back into the building, it'll probably be a hybrid. And thank you again for all our participants. And we will have this recorded, and we'll send out the slides so you can share it with your friends. And everybody have a great day. And it's going to be a beautiful day in Oregon. You got to get outside and take advantage of it. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Amber.
Bye, Susan.